This is the Solid Signal podcast for the week of September 2nd, 2019. A little bit of a secret, I'm actually recording this on August 30th because, hey folks, it's Labor Day on Monday, and I think that I'll take a day off. Of course, in true Solid Signal blog fashion, I probably will still post a few articles. I just love writing that stuff for you, and I hope that you like reading it. But because this podcast is so early, I don't have pressing news to report because that news hasn't happened yet. I'm recording this on Friday. So I thought instead I would rant a little bit about some of the weirder things that I've seen in television in my career as a blogger and podcaster over the last 15 years or so. You know, when I started really being active online and writing about pay television and stuff like that, it was the mid-2000s. Streaming was still several years away. It was practically impossible on mobile devices and very rare when it came to even using a PC. I mean, YouTube had been out for a couple of years at that point, but it was really more used for short-form videos. You didn't really have the ability to do longer stuff on it. Matter of fact, regular people couldn't even upload longer videos. They didn't have, the rule was that you couldn't do that until you were sort of verified. And so the world of television was very different. Believe it or not, back in the mid-2000s, DVRs weren't even terribly popular. A lot of people were still watching TV live. Some folks were recording things on VCRs, but very few. And so watching things live, watching them in reruns were really the only way that you could get the kind of TV content that you wanted. And it informed the TV shows of the time because they were very episodic. They were, they were designed so that if you missed a week, you weren't completely lost, with the exception of, speaking of which, Lost, which was a popular TV show at the time. But I want to talk more about the technology. HD television was just beginning its run back in the early 2000s when I started looking at it. And there were some tech things that never really quite evolved. First of all, there was the idea of the high-definition television with a square format. We think of high-definition today as, widescreen format, but that wasn't a foregone conclusion. Back in 2003, there were a lot of televisions that were made in the traditional square format, and a lot of these were even tube televisions, even though they were capable of receiving high-definition broadcasts and displaying high-definition broadcasts. That kind of went by the wayside pretty quickly. Of course, back then, it was high-definition was a fairly relative thing. Most TVs that received high-definition broadcasts couldn't actually show them in the full resolution that they were broadcast in because it was just too expensive to create a television that would. And I mean, it was $20,000, $25,000 for these high-definition televisions that would cost about $200 today. And what we started to see in those days were larger and larger televisions, 70 and 80-inch televisions, on the horizon, but also some real weirdness as it kind of went on. As people kind of got used to HD televisions, and that happened very quickly because of government action to make sure that people had some money to convert to digital television. The next big wave was supposed to be 3D, and I'm sure you remember 3D. I'm sure you remember not paying for a 3D television. Very few people did. Because the bottom line is they always required these kind of goofy, expensive glasses and gave people headaches. They gave me a headache, and the picture was dim and not terribly high quality. So 3D television never caught on. There were a few attempts by the early 2010s to do glasses-free 3D, but that ship had sailed. It just really never happened. People didn't really want it. And so an interesting offshoot, I remember, of 3D television was the idea that you could watch two shows at once. By which I mean they used a lenticular screen, kind of one of those things that they used for 3D televisions a little bit. That meant that if you looked at the TV from one angle, you got one picture. If you looked at the TV from another angle, you got another picture. And this was supposed to solve all sorts of problems and create harmony in the living room. Of course, by then people were already starting to use their own mobile devices instead of living room TVs, so there wasn't a need for that technology. Another thing I remember coming up in the early 2000s, and this was when the first 4K TVs were starting to get shown around 2012, was the idea of Quad HD. Since there was no 4K content, and let's be honest, there isn't a ton of it today, there was no 4K content, so one use for a 4K television was to show 4 HD programs at the same time. Again, this was supposed to create harmony in the living room. You just chose the one you wanted to watch. Maybe you could have 4 gaming sources so that each person could have their own point of view. Again, this really didn't work because what you were supposed to watch was just in one corner of the screen, and what you were supposed to ignore was in 3/4 of the screen. Did not make a whole lot of sense. TV manufacturers kept trying to come up with ways to make us spend money for years, and most of the 2000s were spent trying to get us to plunk down some cash on TV ideas that never quite panned out. I did not endorse the idea of 4K televisions until just a couple of years ago, when they were basically as cheap as regular televisions, because the content wasn't there. And, well, at that point, why get a television that there's no content for? And today, even, today's 4K content is not as good as it could be unless you're looking at DirecTV. They're really one of the few broadcasters that do real quality 4K. Streaming 4K doesn't so much work. But, you saw a lot of these kind of weird ideas with television. Curved TVs were another one. Does anybody remember curved TVs? Did anyone really buy these? Curved TVs were actually a really great idea. I mean, because by curving the TV, you eliminate a lot of glare, and you create a better experience for somebody who's sitting straight on. But when you're in the living room and you're watching a big TV, you've got a lot of people there, and that means with a curved TV, you've got a lot of people who don't get a great angle. And really, curved TVs were designed to hide the fact that as TVs got cheaper in the mid-2010s, they also got chunkier. It was pretty common to have a really thin TV that was expensive in, say, 2011, 2012. But by 2016, those TVs got actually chunkier because people didn't really want super thin. They just wanted super cheap. As I look back, there have been so many TV fads, manufacturing fads that didn't work out. Cameras in the TVs, nobody really wanted that. A little bit of privacy issue there. Voice-activated remotes, people didn't really want that. These, massive curated app stores, that is still kind of here, but only really like Roku and Samsung and LG have made it work if you have an off-brand TV and it's got a big long app store. Most of those apps are kind of a waste of time and money. Electronic manuals built into the TV. Wow, nobody's going to read that when they've got a phone and they can Google search what they're looking for. But all of this together still leaves me very optimistic about television in the future. I think that television is going to continue to improve, and all of these little experiments just mean that people were just trying new things, trying to make things better, trying to make things more exciting for everybody. And a lot of them didn't work, but a lot of them did. That's how we got inexpensive 4K televisions. That's how we got, fairly decent streaming and high quality. It's how we got Bluetooth in television so you could use a wireless keyboard. This is all great stuff. And I think that while a lot of people are tempted to write off the living room television as a really kind of powerhouse, I'm not one of those people. I think that the shared communal television experience is still strong, and that we're going to continue to see it for at least another 15, 20 years, all other things being considered. That's about it for me for the podcast this week. I hope you like it. I know I ran a little bit long, but I was waxing poetic and kind of being nostalgic and stuff like that. I hope you had a great Labor Day. I'm hoping I will. and I will talk to you again next week.